Hi, my name's Chris Weinman, and I'm here with Helen White and Dr. Dean Siebert to talk about ACTS, which is Americans Caring, Teaching, Sharing. It's a nonprofit organization that's based in the Upper Valley that does community development in Honduras and has been doing so for 30 years now. And we'd like to take an opportunity to share with you what it's all about. Dean, I wonder if you'd give us some background, how ACTS got started, or maybe how you got started with ACTS.
Sure. Well, I'd be happy to give the background, but also I really want to take this opportunity to thank the people of the Upper Valley and in Vermont, New Hampshire in general, because they have contributed to a wonderful thing, I think. This is a community development project in the mountains of Honduras. And it's been going on now for 30 years. But it has succeeded really because the people of the Upper Valley have been so generous, so supportive, so involved in this. And I suspect most of the people in the Upper Valley have no idea how much they're contributing to an international endeavor. So this is an opportunity to tell them a little bit about what they have accomplished. It's really quite an amazing story, I think.
I think so too.
And the story really began about 30 years ago at the time of the Contra War. And a group at the Franconia Congregational Church decided that something better than just sending arms to Central America could be done. And they put knapsacks on and got on a plane and flew to Honduras, I think not knowing exactly what they were going to do. And when they landed and met with some associates there, somebody pointed them up towards the mountains and said, you know, those people there really need help. And so that's where it began. And it's a community development project. And for many, community development is just a term. It's not easy to explain because it's everything. It's medical care and public health, education, agricultural development, economic development, a whole gamut, a whole spectrum of activities. And that's in a way what makes it so remarkable and engaging for so many people. Because the volunteers who go down come from every facet of life that you can think of. Students, college students, medical students, dental students, and in some cases, high school students, teachers from every discipline, doctors, and other health professionals, nurse practitioners, physicians' assistants, and educators, teachers who have had years of experience as teachers and teachers who are just learning and are themselves students, veterinarians. It goes on and on.
I remember hearing about some dentists.
Yes. And as I mentioned, it means that anybody who wants to get involved has a role to play. Often when a new volunteer or recruit may express some concern, well, what can I do? I don't have any special skills. Well, everybody has special skills, and it's all relative. We're working with communities in some cases that are almost medieval in their stage of development at this point. And I think one of the most important things that we contribute is to help them think outside the box, because they've never been outside the box. Their isolation has been extreme in so many ways. And so some of the things that we bring to the table, they've not even been able to imagine. But when they see a possible option that they think has promise, that's generally all that it takes, in the sense that they're willing to go and they're willing to put their time and energy and blood, sweat, and tears into it, and they make it work.
And what is it, Dean? What have you done? What have you seen in the time that you've been going down there?
Well, I guess from a physician's standpoint, of course, I have to lead with the medical clinic. And I guess that's in part because that was our first focus. And I think that's so often true in international health. People know they need lots of things. They're uncertain about all the things they need, but they are certain that they need help with medical care. So it's a good way to establish oneself with the community. And ours, I think, has been, our endeavors in the area of medicine has been so substantial because it's been so consistent. You know, I think so many medical initiatives in the developing world are just short-term, pass out the pills and go on, and never to return. And the fact that we have been there consistently for 30 years, I think is just an entirely different and sadly all too infrequent scenario.
I remember you're telling me some years ago about how it was that when you first got down there, you quickly realized that you were treating the same conditions over and over again.
Oh, that was certainly true. The first time I went down there, I went to a village of indigenous people, of Indian folk, and they are always the poorest. Sadly, they're the least likely to own titles to their land, so when push gets to shove, they get shoved. And there was a village of 22 families, and on that day, I saw 87 patients, which is a lot of patients, more than I've ever seen, more than I ever saw before in one day, and more than I've ever hoped to see again in one day. And they had so many problems, not major problems, but things that just kind of make life a constant misery, sap their energy. And part of it was related to their water source, which for the 22 families was a muddy puddle about like this. And among other things, we arrived with a shovel and a pickaxe. And I looked at those villagers, and I looked at this puddle, and I looked at our shovel and our pickaxe, and thought, this isn't really going to get us anywhere. But they grabbed the shovel and pickaxe, and they got right to it. Now, obviously, they weren't going to accomplish very much, but I think it established a couple of things. First of all, it established the fact that given the tools, they would do the work. And secondly, a fundamental problem in any of the villages that we work with, and we've been working consistently now with about 13 villages, that all of the villages need good water. From a medical perspective, if you don't have good water, nothing is possible. And if you do have good water, at least you have the sense that anything is possible. And that brings me, well, in this particular case, one of the major problems was intestinal parasites. And that's a problem not so much because the water is contaminated, but because the people have such a challenge with personal hygiene because there's just an insufficient quantity of water. And so I would say that the vast majority of patients that I saw on that first occasion had intestinal parasites. Now, when we go to that village, because they now have good water and they've been educated about the problems, we seldom see intestinal parasites.
How did that change, Dean, the water situation?
Well, after a few years of our involvement, it really became apparent that some of these projects needed expertise that we in ACTS didn't have. And I think that was such an important message for us, because much of our success, I think, over this extended period now is related to the fact that we have worked hard and been successful at recruiting good partners. And in this case, the partner that we recruited is an organization called Engineers Without Borders. And the particular chapter that we've been working with is at Northeastern in Boston. And they're super. The only complaint I have is they're too energetic. If you're on a team with Engineers Without Borders, it's flat out exhausting. And but they go down and scope out the nature of the project, get a sense of what's going to be required, come back to school, develop their engineering plans, which in some cases are extraordinarily complex because the water sources may be far from the village. Then go down and, with the help of the villagers, actually put the system in place. And it's just amazing now. I think they've worked with 7 villages now. Villages that had little puddles as their water source and now have running water at every household. It's just an amazing difference.
One of the things that had struck me about ACTS when I first learned about it, and does to this day, is this notion of, we know that you raise funds, but that basically all of the effort that goes from the U.S. down to Honduras for this community development is volunteer. So help me a little bit understand how these water systems, I understand they were designed in Boston and that the natives, everybody worked together to put them in place, but how did that actually happen?
Well, let me...
I think it's a great example.
Yeah, let me start out by saying a water system to one of those villages is not necessarily a very expensive affair. In some cases, a water system could be put in place for $500.
Hallelujah.
Now, to us, that doesn't seem like an extraordinary amount of money. To the people in those villages, $500 is an insurmountable obstacle. However, they can understand the benefits of the system. And we always negotiate with them and get them to accept the idea that once a system is in place, that they have to tax themselves so that the system can be repaired and expanded when required. Because water systems, like all of our initiatives, we do concern ourselves with sustainability. We don't want to be colonials and just dump resources in there and then somehow expect that life is going to be good forever after. So that's important. But the other point that I think you're trying to make is that all of this is a consequence of volunteerism. And that's what makes this particular initiative, I think, so remarkable. When we sit down and talk with what ACTS has accomplished, with other NGOs, non-governmental organizations involved in Honduras, and describe what we've done and how we've done it and how much has been accomplished, I think there's general sense of amazement, because it's all volunteers. And the volunteers that, the Upper Valley volunteers are just extraordinary in so many ways, not only in joining us directly and sharing their talents, but giving, generating resources, and resources of all types. Just let me give you a couple of examples here. We spend a lot of energy on caring for disabled people in those villages. Being disabled anywhere is tough, but being disabled when you're immersed in poverty is really, really hard. And I think we've been very successful. Let me give you an example. There's a young man by the name of Carlos who lives in a mountain village there. I think you know Chris, and certainly Helen knows him. Carlos is a favorite, I guess in part because no matter what the adversity, he has an amazing smile that just captures everybody's heart immediately. But Carlos had polio as an infant, and he has terrible contractures of his legs, so that his heels are essentially pulled up beneath his buttocks. And he scampers around with one foot down on two hands, very, very much like a crab. And it's just amazing how mobile he is. But it became apparent that his joints were being used in such a distorted way that they couldn't last for too long. And that if Carlos had a horse, then he would be infinitely more capable of doing the things that he had to do in order to survive. And so this particular challenge was presented to the West Lebanon Rotary Club. And they said, we will raise the funds and see that Carlos gets a horse. And that has changed Carlos's life. The horse, by the way, cost $85. And the West Lebanon Rotary Club has agreed, as Carlos's horse, Capito, has reached kind of the end of his lifespan, that they will get another horse for Carlos. But the horse, as I say, costs $85, and then the saddle costs $250. It's not often in this country that the saddle always costs more than the horse.
Indeed.
But it's changed Carlos's life, and the people who are involved in the Rotary Club here are the people who are responsible for making that happen. Yeah. Just yesterday, I collected, with the help of a Hanover fireman, fire equipment, which is just excellent equipment, unheard of in Honduras, in the villages, and even the small cities that we serve, but obsolete by our standards. And this is just, and we've worked out the mechanism for getting this equipment. Thousands of feet of fire hose, personal firefighting gear, helmets, boots, gloves, and now self-contained air pack units. We've collected this not only from the Hanover Fire Department, but the fire departments in Lebanon and Norwich and Barnard and Shelburne and others, and worked out the arrangements to get it shipped free down to Honduras, and then then to the places where it's most needed. Again, I think that the communities whose fire departments have donated that equipment could have no idea that these materials are serving maybe 150,000 people, They're serving in a small city where there are 6 fire hydrants, and the tallest ladder is 35 feet. Again, what a difference the people here have been able to make.
I was struck when I was down there with you a few years ago. We met with a lot of other NGOs, and it was a marvelous exposure to see how many people are working so successfully, and it was clear to me in countries all over the world, but this particular exposure in Honduras. And as you said earlier, what ACTS has been able to accomplish without any administrative costs whatsoever. Mm-hmm. That, I think, is just astonishing. So I suppose I'm at risk here of diminishing the supply of volunteers to go on trips, but volunteers pay their own way. There is no cost to that effort. It all goes right.
That's right. Money we collect does not pay for volunteer trips. Volunteers do pay their own way. In the case of Engineers Without Borders, I think they do some fundraising because they're students, and there's some Dartmouth alums who also do some fundraising to go down and work with the program down there. So that's correct. Our funds do not go to pay for people's trips, and I think that's important for people to know.
Yeah, it's really quite remarkable. Helen, I just got to ask, how'd you get involved?
Well, Dean's a very persuasive person, and I have a background in community development, and I love to spend time in Latin American countries. I'm one of those people that Dean might have mentioned that said, what can I do, because I'm a generalist, I'm not a doctor or a dentist, but I do speak some Spanish. I've only been down twice. I look forward to going again, and I become a person who I guess is a utility infielder, doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and helping with meetings and helping. In only 2 trips, I've become, I feel, good friends with some of the leaders of the village.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. You've been there, you know what it's like. It's very rewarding work.
Indeed, yeah. I was struck, the two things that I brought back from my trip were Dean's, at some point, illuminating this notion of not being an edifice, of coming in to a village, identifying a need, coming to an agreement with the population on what it was that they wanted, and everybody agreeing on what would be necessary to bring it to fruition.
Yeah, let me just, I've been with ACTS for just 3 or 4 years, and I'll tell you a couple of the things that have impressed me, and my background is in community development in this country. But one of the things is the all-volunteerism, the vision, but in particular, the fact that the leadership has been developed down there so that the leaders in the village, the main village we work in is El Rosario, but the leaders there are really mentoring leaders and potential leaders in the communities, in roughly 12 communities around El Rosario. I think that's really a very important aspect of ACT's work, and the priorities for work in the village are set by the folks in the village. So right now, a very high priority of the villagers identified a year or so ago was dental health, and we're working really hard with them now to develop a dental program. Another thing that struck me about ACT's work, which is, I think, unusual, is the fact that ACTS works with a village as a whole and increasingly expanding area, but also can at the same time focus with individuals. So Dean mentioned Carlos as an example, but Carlos is just one example. There are others as well. So to be able to work at the large scale, and in fact with the fire equipment, even a much larger scale, but also with individuals in these villages is quite remarkable. And then finally the breadth of the kind of work, everything from, well, now we're getting into even computer learning,
Yep.
helping people to learn about computers and things of that nature, which are really new to them. So the breadth of work from water systems to now educating about computers is really quite phenomenal.
Yeah, it was fascinating to me to see. I remember when I was down there in the course of a conference with some other NGOs, we met a dentist who had some students, as I recall it, and a relationship was born, and it suited the students to have a place to practice their skills, and it suited the village to have some skilled dental work done, and nobody, it didn't cost anybody anything. You know, it was marvelous.
I'd like to also mention an extraordinarily valuable partner, Upper Valley partner, in an informal sense, but that's the North Cotton Cancer Center. Several years ago, one of our board members, who was a associate director of the cancer center, got involved and felt that this might provide an opportunity for the cancer center to get engaged in international health as well. This is something that cancer centers across the nation are encouraged to do. And she developed a close professional relationship with a Dr. Siapa in San Pedro Sula, kind of the commercial capital of Honduras. And they decided they would begin their partnership with a cervical screening program. Now, the organization that Siapa heads in San Pedro Sula had never been involved in a cervical screening program in a rural area. And so there was some uncertainty. And when they began the planning process with the people of El Rosario, initially they anticipated, well, given these sparse, widely distributed villages, maybe 50 people would show up.
And there's no transportation in the sense that we
Right.
know it.
Right. On the day of the screening, 500 showed up.
Yeah.
And each woman had a pelvic exam, was taught how to do a breast self-examination, had a pap smear, and a smear was taken for HPV, or the human papillomavirus, which is now recognized as being the cause of cervical cancer in the vast majority of patients. But not all strains of HPV are equally virulent in this regard. Mm-hmm. And as you may know, vaccines have now been developed to prevent HPV, and they're widely used in this country now. And the vaccine, the efficacy of the vaccine really depends on developing a vaccine against the specific strains carried by the patient. So one of the really remarkable facets of this screen was to bring all of these HPV virus samples back to the lab here at the Dartmouth-Hitchcock and have those strains determined. And out of this may come, changes in the way that cervical cancer is approached, not only in the villages where we're working, but in all of Honduras. And this is just the beginning, I think, of a relationship between the North Cotton Cancer Center, the Upper Valley, and the whole medical community in Honduras. It's quite remarkable. I just want to mention also that Honduras is a very, very poor country. Depending on how you count it, it's either the second or third poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. Haiti is number one, and either Nicaragua or Honduras is number two. So their resources are very limited. They are caught in a terrible, terrible squeeze between the drug producers of South America, Colombia in particular, and the drug consumers. And we, sadly, this country is the greatest of the drug consumers. And our consumption of those drugs creates mayhem in these poor Central American countries, because they're the ones who become afflicted with the gangs involved in the merchandising of these things. I think that's an important perspective for people to have.
It is, and I'm struck by, as you say that, I'm struck by the continuity in the effort. You know, as I recall, you're saying the initial draw to go down there was to do something other than shipping arms, for Americans to be able to bring a benefit to these people. And while that political turmoil has altered and has settled to a great degree, there's another scourge down there, and it's not self-inflicted. Where they're sort of caught between, as you say, the producers and the consumers, and we're the consumers.
Yeah.
And right, one thing to think about in the villages where we work, the work that we're doing in partnership with folks there really gives Hondurans in the villages an opportunity to find a future and not go into the drug trade.
Yeah.
And it develops resilience in them, because the temptation can be to go down to the city and make a buck in the drug trade.
Sure, you got to have hope.
Now, another dimension that I'd like to get out, and that is that an organization like ACTS requires the active involvement of people here, not people who will be going to Honduras, but just sustaining this organization. It takes a lot of planning. We meet on a monthly basis to consider a whole variety of new ideas, new challenges, new priorities. Maybe Helen could speak a little bit to our steering committee and the input that so many people in the Upper Valley put into this. It's not just, those who are going to Honduras.
Well, the steering committee, as Dean mentioned, meets monthly. It's a working group. Everybody on the committee is able to contribute in one way or another. It might be, we have one person who's very technically inclined, and he has been to Honduras a number of times. We have, actually, I guess everybody on the committee has been there at least once. Our treasurer maybe has not been to Honduras. I'm not sure whether he has, but we have a treasurer who hasn't been there in many years in any case.
Yes,
he has, long ago, okay. But he stayed treasurer and does a very good job of being treasurer, and I don't think he's anxious to go back, but he's very happy doing what he does for the organization. We always have needs. I mean, we have needs. Right now, we could use some help on things like Facebook and our website, maintaining that. We do an annual solicitation when we need things. Very often we put out a call. Dean mentioned the need for the horse. Sometimes we'll put out a call for something as simple as we need a wheelchair, and usually a wheelchair is produced.
I remember a sewing machine going down not long ago.
Quite a few sewing machines.
Quite a to-do, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we need things as weird as someone who can fix sewing machines, or a sewing machine was customized for a woman who's paraplegic, and that work was done, I think someone at Dartmouth did. So we have a great variety of needs and opportunities for people to be involved. Could be writing, it could be stuffing envelopes. We do, of course, do the annual solicitation, and we do need funds, but we make a dollar stretch a long way, often by finding additional volunteer help in one way or another. So the steering committee is very devoted. It's not like many boards where people go to the meetings and can offer their 2 cents. We want to have work along with the 2 cents. And it's great to be involved, because you really do feel that you can make a difference.
Have any fun?
Oh yeah, we do have fun also.
Great, I believe it.
Helen, do you want to mention our website?
Absolutely, yes. We encourage people to visit the website, which is actshonduras.org. So it's ACTS Honduras, all one word, .org. And we also have a Facebook page, which we'd love people to visit and friend us on Facebook. And we will soon have our annual newsletter coming out. We produce a newsletter in November, and that will be, if people don't get it in the mail, they can find it on the website as well. And encourage people, one can contact ACTS through the website. There's a little contact us, and you can go to info@ or volunteer@ by going to the contact area on the website.
Wonderful. Thanks, Helen.
And you mentioned the newsletter. For years, Stave Puzzles has been so supportive.
Yes, they've
in
been
that.
printing the newsletter. We have a volunteer who is doing the layout for the newsletter
Oh,
this
great.
year. When we need something, we really do look for volunteers. I was having trouble with the website, and I was meeting with a young man for another reason, and we were making small talk before our meeting, and I said, "You don't have anything to do with websites, do you?" He said, "Well, my wife does." And I said, "Oh, would she be interested?" Well, she's now our webmaster, and she has not been to Honduras. She'd like to go, but she's pretty busy doing the work that she does, and we're very happy to have her aboard. So if people have skills that they think we might be able to use, we'd love to hear from them.
Great. Anything else you want to include, Dean, while we're here? Or?
I think, I hope we've given people a sense of what we do. I hope we've given them a sense of how generous the people in the Upper Valley are with their time and energy. And I hope that in many ways they can sense the success that they have brought about. And so I just want to thank them. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Remember on the trip that I took down there with you, you were reflecting on what was then 20 years of your own personal experience and how it was that in that time, increasingly sort of expanding around the center of activity in El Rosario, the villagers were seeing what was being accomplished and of course wanting that for themselves, becoming engaged, and the blessings were sort of spreading wider and wider. It's really quite a remarkable thing to see. Just before we came down here this afternoon, I got on the website and just to sort of get an update and refresh my memory, and I read words to the effect that in 1986, a group of people in Franconia, New Hampshire, who were concerned about the American presence in Central America, which was basically arms, traveled to Honduras to promote peace and justice through community development. And that effort became ACTS, Americans Caring, Teaching, Sharing. And we'd love to get you involved. actshonduras.org. Thanks.